Hi, everybody. Welcome to the second debate of today. My name is Zuza Nazaruk. I'm an investigative journalist, and I'm based here in Rotterdam. And I have the pleasure to lead this discussion with our three panelists. We're going to be discussing community living. And when I was preparing for this, I was thinking that when I think about community living, the first thing I think about is affordable rent for people that, for whatever reason, don't fit into the speculative housing market. Sorry, I really have a stage fright, so bear with me. Yeah, and such affordable renting happens in buildings that would probably otherwise stay empty, so an efficient use of the city space. And when I come to communities as an outsider, I have the pleasure to enjoy a very lively cultural program, right? So gardening sessions, I don't know, community dinners, clothing swaps, bike repairs, you name it. So yeah, and there are also many challenges that we're going to discuss in a second. So welcome to our three panelists. We have Chiara Tondorf from Poortgebouw. We have Antoine Dutrieu, yeah, a development leader from Comuna, an NGO based in Brussels. And we have Piet Vollard, co-founder of Stad in de Maak, City in the Making. So yeah, let's get it started. We're going to have the last 10 minutes for questions. I will try to do that, so keep them. Yeah, so I would like to first invite you all to introduce yourselves more in depth. Let's start with Chiara.
Hello, I'm Chiara. I live at the Poortgebouw and I'm a member of the Vereniging Poortgebouw. The Poortgebouw is a building that if you live in Rotterdam, I'm sure you've at least seen. It should be right next to that. We were cut out by the gemeente. It's a living community of 30 plus members. At the moment we are 33. That varies a little bit depending how many people share a room. The building was squatted in the 80s, and 4 years later it was legalized by the municipality a little bit as an experiment of what would this social community create, and we never renewed the contract. As a community, we come together with a vision, like every community does, and our vision is to be a breeding ground and an experimental space for non-commercial art practices. And that can be anything, from art, music, open stages. We want to be a platform for people who could otherwise not perform, and to experiment around. As a community, we organize a lot of events, concerts. We have bar nights. We have a shop that's called the Swap Shop, and it's a shop that works without money. People bring things, people take things. And we have a little library that's also open once a week. Internally, we divide the spaces. We divide our spaces in 3 categories. Our private spaces, which are our private rooms. Our communal spaces, which are all kitchens, bathrooms, but also the ateliers and the living room. And our public spaces, which are the venue and the cafe and the swap shop, which are open for the public to visit and inhabit. This is what we share beyond our house. We are organized internally sociocratically, so we don't make decisions by majority votes, but we have long discussions rounds, and finally we try to come to a consensus-based decision. And we are divided into different working groups. Each working group has their own domain of what they can make decisions on. If that's the maintenance group, they can decide what needs to be renovated and how. And if it's the activity group, they decide on what events we will have. And if there's a decision that needs to be decided by everyone, it will be brought back to the plenum where everyone is present. What else to say? We're very grateful to the squatters. That's it for now, maybe?
I have a brief question. You said you never renewed the contract with the municipality. What does that mean?
That means we still have a very advantageous contract. that our rent is indeed still very affordable. The house is nowadays not owned by the municipality anymore. It's owned by some random real estate investor. It was sold 3 times since then. Unfortunately, never to us. Also, if we would like to buy the house. Yeah, maybe this is questions for later. In the rent contract, there's also every person who lives there there's written that we all contribute 8 hours to the community a month. That's working events or doing maintenance or cooking for the community. Whatever brings you joy, that is up to you. And it means that our rent contract is indeterminate. I could technically die in the house if I wanted. Grow old and die, ideally. Which is also very luxurious in a time where housing contracts are very precarious and short-term. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Antoine, you have a presentation. Would you like to go next?
So my name is Antoine. I just came from Brussels today, and I'm going to talk to you today about Comuna, which is doing social temporary use. I don't know if this is the same expression that you use here, to temporary use, for the use of empty buildings. But anyways, I'm going to go through this structure. First talk to you about Brussels, because you might not really know what's going on there. I won't be long on this, and then I'm going to talk about temporary use, the practice itself, and then introduce you to the structure that I work for. So as you know, Brussels is full of all these kind of touristic attractions and institutions, but it's also full of empty spaces, such as this. And so full, actually, we have a lot of different spaces. This is a prison on the right. This is a police training camp on the left. This one used to be a post office, like when they manage the mails, the thousands of mails that come every day. And we made this like little, let's say, summary of all the needs that are happening in Brussels, which is actually quite scary. So many people waiting for social housing, so many people living in the streets. Those are like recent numbers. These people have to wait up to 10 years to get social housing, and I think now the last numbers are up to 16 years, so it's quite hardcore. And however, so much space that is empty in Brussels, so different kinds, as I just said, and we counted that there was 6.5 million square meters of empty spaces in Brussels. I'm going to come back to this surface later, but we found that this was actually a resource that we could use to serve the needs of a city. Like instead of seeing it as something detrimental for a city, we use it and we try to turn actually mostly the mindset of people about empty space rather than, like that they see it as something that is, they're detrimental. So to change the narrative, what we say is that obviously this is a bit of a selling, marketing type of thing, but we say that it's a quadruple win. It was easier when we said triple win. Before we didn't put the neighborhood into the formula, but now, I mean, it's quite obvious. I might come back to it later. Why is it a win for all these actors? But I think you can maybe imagine it. I don't want to run through all the time right now immediately, so I'll come back to it if I have more time. But basically, we think that everybody benefits from an empty space being used, sorry. And talking about the 6.5 million square meters, we actually said that in Brussels, which is a city of 1 million inhabitants and 19 gemeenten, there's actually a 20th one in Brussels that is only composed of empty space. That was the narrative that we used in 2019 when there was regional elections to attract attention upon this topic. And actually it worked, so we created a fake gemeente, we created the website. I guess Leegbeek means something to you all who speak Dutch. And Saint-Vide, Saint Empty in French. And so basically this was the opportunity for us to get attention about the fact that there is not only empty spaces all over Brussels, but also urgent needs, and also that there was two types of temporary occupation that happened at the same time. One that is for profit, and the other that is social. And we wanted to actually attract attention on the fact that social temporary use, and that's the title of this presentation, should be supported by public authorities. That's for the context, and then I'm going to talk about Comuna. This is again, a bit of the narrative, but we think that empty spaces should be used to turn our cities into affordable, democratic, resilient, and creative spaces or places. And I would say that around this, the name Comuna comes also from the concept of community. So I believe that many different actors from temporary use all over Europe come from different sectors. Some people come from the arts, some people come from the, let's say, the activist environment, others from the community environment. And we all meet, we use the same tool of empty spaces, but we actually come with different, let's say, perspectives and ways to use empty space. So how do we achieve this mission? But this is what we do, what I could think of that maybe gives the right image of what we do on a daily basis. We try to do mixed use, so that means that we want housing to be in a building as much as possible, even when it doesn't look like it's possible, but also to have all the other use that the city might need. So that means activities for youngsters, study places, eating places, whatever, sports, bicycles, and so on, and I can't talk about them all. We always try to do calls for common, so that means that the space that we get access to is always too small for all the people who need to use it. So what we do is that we propose to people to share spaces rather than compete to get access to a space. We do free barbecues, because we believe that it's a very good way to create communities and to create tight bonds. Food is an amazing tool as well. So create communities, I said it already. We do participative governance, and therefore we also tried very hard in facilitation, first within our own team, but then we applied those methods to our communities. And then we also became a force of proposition for policymakers. So I think that actually lobbying is a very important part of our mission. And I guess it will come back during the conversation as well. And then we'll talk about it later, but I think that temporary use is just a step to claim the city, and we should obviously anchor this into long-term dynamics. I guess maybe Piet is going to talk about it more than me. Quickly, this is an image of Comuna. So we were born in 2013 and raised slowly until 2021, I would say, and then there was a drastic change. We are 45 people right now, hosting so many inhabitants, so many projects. And I think that in Brussels we actually became one of the main organizations, and it's interesting because that means that, as I said, we are lobbying actors, and there's a lot of, I would say, responsibility, but also power to be in that position, so that we can actually influence the way policies are created. And then quickly, I'm going to show you images. I won't go into details, but those are different projects before and after. So an old garage turned into a cultural place. There's also housing and artist workshops in there. That's another project in called Maxima. So that's 6,000 square meters. It's old office buildings and garages, and we turned it into what you see: housing, offices, mixed use. And Zuza asked us to talk about the people we work with, but mostly we work with public authorities, because our work costs money. It doesn't generate so much money, just a little bit. Therefore, we need funding to survive. That's another project in social housing, where we occupy right now, I think, 26 apartments, hopefully 40-something in a few months. And this is where we actually host homeless people. And that's after the war in Ukraine. It's this regional policy of taking over office buildings, turning them into communal shelters where we host Ukrainian people. And then, yeah, you asked us to talk about our ambitions as well. But I would say, like George Clooney and homelessness, what else, right? while creating long-term projects, thanks to a cooperative that is called Fairground. I guess we'll come back to it later. And then, I think we should launch proof of concept projects to influence policymakers. So that's what I said before. We became important, and it's something that we need to use, because we won't be able to occupy those 6.5 million square meters. So only one organization is not enough. So we should actually have little sisters and brothers, and mostly get support, like structural support from the policymakers to do that in Brussels and everywhere in Europe, in the world. So that's it for me.
Go.
Yeah. Yeah, we are a bit indeed like Comuna. In fact, they visited us when we were only 1 or 2 years old to learn the trick. We too manage empty buildings on a temporary basis, but unlike Brussels, there is not that much empty space in Rotterdam. Not at the moment anymore. Maybe it was the case some 15 years ago, but now certainly there's not these kinds of spaces we can only dream of. What we do is we manage part of the empty housing stock of social housing corporations. That's what it comes down to. That was not out of choice, it was offered to us that way. Starting now maybe 12 years ago with 2 small properties in Rotterdam North, and then gradually growing in more smaller locations and bigger ones along the way. What we do with that is, first of all, there's a difference between Comuna. We are not funded, we out of choice. A little bit like you heard in the first half of the presentations, is to be able to be autonomous financially is very important for us, and so we do admit subsidy, but only for cultural programs that we don't need. Apart from that, we want to be autonomous for that. It's not really a necessity, but it's a choice we make. But the difference too is probably that we do much more housing than a Comuna does. 3/4 of what we offer as space are housing spaces, but we always include within these projects common spaces, shared spaces, free of rent or some kind, to be used both by the residents and by people from the neighborhood. So we are a bit alike and we are a bit different. We can discuss that later on maybe. But this temporarity is not, let's say, our main goal. We use these projects, as we always say, as a sort of a laboratory or playing ground to experiment with new ways of communal living and living together and sharing both spaces and facilities and resources among each other. In order to be able, this learning process, in order to be able to establish projects that are not temporary anymore, but are for forever, in the form of housing cooperatives, always trying to mix both living and working in one project. We have not been that successful in that sense, you could say. We've been trying for 6-7 years here in the city to buy property and establish a housing cooperative. It's not, as yet, not happened, but we are also part of a larger national network, which is called Vrijkoop, of new cooperatives. And there you can see that they are already starting, and the new ones have come up since, let's say, the 5 years of existence. We are now probably 7 or 8 of these projects already. So yeah, that's more or less of an introduction, probably enough, unless you want to know something more, and then we can enter the discussion.
Yeah, let's do that. So I think all of you already touched upon this a little bit, but why do we need community living in cities? It seems like you are becoming more and more of a counterculture in cities that are focused more and more on attracting, you know, rich expats and the likes. So what value in terms of social or ecological or whatever else impacts do communities like yours have for cities?
Well, it's not just about, let's say, communal living. It's also about affordability. One of the unlike het Poortgebouw, but Communa and us are, let's say, children of the financial crisis of 2008, you could say, and which and also, let's say, children of neoliberalism, which made it almost impossible to live in an affordable way, even an alternative way, let alone an alternative way. So affordability too is for us at least a thing to remember. And yes, to why it would be good to live collectively. Well, the simple answer is we as humans are not able to live not in a collective, to not be social. But there are gradients of social ability, and of course you could use. And the current system, well, I'm a bit older than most of you. During my lifetime, I've seen this become more and more less social and more, let's say, individual. It's not really great news, and along that things happened that are really not that good. Well, the affordability of living is one of the things, but also there's what's wrong with society at the moment. Well, there's also a key, let's say, concept talked about, which is trust. And there is less trust now than there used to be, let's say, 50 years ago, let's say, to put it a bit back. People really don't trust each other anymore. So that may also be the case why we need to learn again how to live collectively.
So we have affordability, so inclusion pretty much, and trust. What else, Antoine, Chiara?
Yeah, I mean, it's more environmentally friendly. It's quite obvious. We use less space, we use less facilities. With 30 people, we have 3 washing machines, very practically. Whilst compared, otherwise, we would have 30 washing machines if every unit had their own. Yeah, we use a lot less resources, we use a lot less space, but we also share the resources we have amongst each other. We have a strong network of where a skill or a tool can be shared amongst each other, and if it's not present in the house, friend of a friend has it. We have a saying that in Poortgebouw, you don't go to things, things come to you. And socially, we come together at the beginning of the year to set our goal for the year, what we want to achieve as a community, and every time comes out we want to be together. That's what we wish for, and that's what we're able to provide. As Piet said, we are social humans. This is what we need to be a resilient society, is to be interconnected with each other and to share the knowledge that we have and the resources and the support. Poortgebouw is also a house full of a little bit outcasts, people that don't fit that much because they are too creative or too poor or too funny, I don't know. Yeah, we're not the most normal people, so we provide the support to each other that in the wider society we don't get. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said the counter power. I mean, maybe you used another word, but I use counter power. I think in the course of my trajectory at Comuna, so basically what I do is I develop new projects. So I go and visit empty buildings, I make business plans, I see whether the project is feasible, and then we do the vision together with the team, and then we look for money. As I said, funding is our main source of income, and therefore to get funding you need to have the support of the policymakers or politicians. So the big part of my job is actually to get to create connections with those politicians and their assistants. So for me, coming from the associative world, was quite a discovery to discover those ministers and their partners and so on, and all the games that are going on in those courts. And what I noticed is that actually they don't really have a clue of what they're doing. And it's true, like they are not necessarily smarter than you and me. So actually they're super happy to be inspired. And they are even happier when they are given the texts, like ready-made texts that they need to implement their policies. And so I think for doing that, first we need to gain legitimacy. We need to gain strength. And I think one of these aspects of getting legitimacy and strength is going through living in community or making community projects. So I just make this little loop to come back to your question. So, for example, if you have, I mean, it's stupid, but 15,000 followers on Facebook in Brussels, it's a lot. So that means that there's a whole community. If you have 200 projects hosted in your buildings, or if you host 400 people, you become an actor that needs to be heard. And actually, they call you to know your opinion about some topics. And I think without really knowing that we were doing this, is what we did in the last 10 years. So the first thing was what I would call a laboratory. The founders of Comuna actually just occupied the building because there was an opportunity without really any vision. And then they provided service to others who needed space but couldn't necessarily afford to manage a building, didn't have the technical tools or knowledge, or the financial or whatever. And then slowly the vision came out of all this practice with so many people and through so many years. And then after this experimenting, we found that this narrative would work. So as I said in my presentation, and the 20th municipality, and we keep pushing on this. And then our mission is actually to influence the politicians, as I said, to give, to make buildings, laws, money available for this practice to be spread. And I think for me, this is only the first step to reclaim the city. As I said before, temporary is necessarily limited, and we should push more. So I'm going to finish on this, but maybe one last thing is that through this experience, what I noticed is that we actually, as they said before, we don't know how to live in a community anymore. So it's actually something that we need to, I think, relearn, and it's not always easy. So I think for me, that's also something that we could tackle in this discussion. Is like I feel very individual personally. Don't know how you feel. I would be happy to hear you out. And although I'm part of these collective movements and projects for like 20 years now, I think it's difficult for us to give up, to shut up when we need to shut up, to be humble, to let the others talk, and so on. So yeah, I think for me there's something to learn, and this happens through community projects. We test our ability to live together or to work together.
I think my next question, we'll touch upon this, but I just want to stay on the sort of benefits of communities for cities for a second. So you talked a bit about what happens for people that live within your structures and a bit about the policy and how that you can influence that. How about the neighborhoods? How, like, do people knock on your doors and say, hey, you guys seem to be doing an interesting thing? Like, do you actually engage with like your wider neighborhood?
Yes, we do. One of the bigger projects was in the Almondestraat here in Rotterdam. And that was about 50 social housing dwellings that were about to be demolished for urban renewal. And we could manage them only for a short time, actually, because only for about 2 years. And that normally we find that too short. But anyway, we did it because it was a challenge, and it was opposite the office of the Social Housing Corporation. And because we had so little time, that normally we try to establish the use of these common spaces organically. We just leave them empty and see what happens. It's not really that case, but that's more or less it. But in this case, we could not do that. There was too short a time for that, because these things take time. So we sort of harvested what we called orphaned citizens initiatives from the area, and offered them a space in one of the houses. So we, in that case, actively incorporated citizens initiatives of a different kind from the area, and ranging from language studies of Moroccan women to sewing for the summer carnival by Cap Verdean people, to a catering business, etc., etc. So that was actively done. But also besides that, our very first project, we shared a washing machine, and we put it on the street facade, more or less in the window, and said, "This is a wasbuur. This is a laundrette, small laundrette." And people ask, "What do you mean by that?" Well, you can use this washing machine if you want to, and people did. So this also happened on a very small scale, and most of our common spaces are shared with people from the around the places, not just residents. But this was never, hardly ever done actively. It mostly happens organically, you could say.
Portgebouw hasn't always had the most peaceful relationship with the direct neighborhood. We're known to be loud, and Portgebouw has also weathered and witnessed the gentrification of the whole Kop van Zout. There's very interesting aerial pictures where you can see the development of the area. Everything changes, only Portgebouw stays. And yeah, with the gentrification, a new neighborhood came. By now we have agreements with the neighborhood about being loud and sound, and so we found a mutual agreement, and that works very well. And we have a giveaway closet, which is greatly appreciated by the direct neighborhood as well. And we have a garden, which is not super big compared to the house. It's like, I think, 15 square meters. But that was also very appreciated when we started to put more greenery into the area. And that's a project that continuously goes on. But the direct neighborhood actually often doesn't know who we are and what we are. And at some points we are more interested in building that bridge, and at some points less. The door for them is open as it is for everyone else. We do provide community for more niche communities, like the noise scene lives and is present very much at our house. We've started the queer bar nights, so we are a community or a space for the queer community. In that sense, we provide a space for the wider neighborhood, but not always the direct neighborhood. And we did have a banner on our house about the Palestine struggle that said "ceasefire now," and that also caused quite some commotion within the neighborhood. Mostly appreciated, but not all. Yeah.
For Comuna, it's really at the center of the practice. So, as I said, barbecues is key to our practice. This sounds ridiculous or a bit stupid, but free food, usually meat, unfortunately, works well to get to connect. Washing machine is a good tool as well, I think, and another one that's a killing one is fun fairs. that works as well. So we usually have fun fairs, at least in one of our buildings. It's once a year. We have flea markets also for the people, and that's a way for people who don't usually dare to open to go through the doors of our buildings to actually come in a bit without really realizing that they're actually coming in. And once they've come in once, it's easier for a second time to happen. And so in all projects, we have one coordinator, one technician, and one person who is actually in charge of the social community work. And that person doesn't only create community within the residents, but also with the neighborhood. And actually, at some point, like we create in the place where we occupy empty social housing, we have every Friday food cooked by the residents who are ex-homeless people, homeless women actually in this project only. And everybody is welcome to come and eat, and social workers come and eat, neighbors. It's like this, in the social housing there's a lot of elder people, so they come and connect. They were scared of these homeless people before, and now they are friends. So yeah, it's always through the same tools, I would say, and sometimes it fails, indeed. Sometimes youngsters come and break everything in our buildings, and we don't really know how to react. Sometimes they sell drugs and they use a space that we give them to sell drugs. So like it's difficult situations, sometimes violent, but yeah, I think it's key to, if we don't bring a space to the people in the neighborhood, then who to then, I would say.
A few things that I recognize: sharing the washing machine almost always works. Gardening together is almost always a success. Eating together, especially if it's free, is we have done that also from the beginning. Actually, what was very interesting, in the Almondestraat, we had a very special evening, which was called Soup Nights. There were 52 apartments in the building, and somebody said, well, if everybody from one of these apartments for once a year would cook for everybody else, then we would have free food every weekday, every 1 day in the week. So on Tuesdays, one of the 52 apartments would cook, and this has now become a practice. So cooking for each other and call it a free meal, although the one who cooks has to somehow come up with the ingredients, is also really working very well. And those are what also always works, we have experienced, is a shared workspace, a shared place where you can use tools from each other, a shared bicycle repair place, stuff like that. They're really basic and they really work well. And from our last project, now we are in Vlaardingen. That too these are somewhat like Almondestraat, about, in this case, 60 social houses that need to be demolished and built anew. And our frustration with Almondestraat was that it was really a success, both in terms of attention and also by the people who live there. But we had to leave after 2 years, and we didn't leave anything behind except for a lot of photographs and memories. And so for this new project in Vlaardingen, we said, okay, whatever happens, we want to leave something behind. Whether it is an idea or something tangible, that's not really that important. And what we are now doing is convincing the housing corporation to include these collective activities that obviously work, because we have now enough experience in different kinds of projects to be able to say this is proof of by practice. So they are now making the gardens collective again. So instead of all kinds of small private gardens, one bigger collective garden. And they also, there's now in the project, is that instead of making bicycle sheds individually, they share them among more houses, so that they can become bigger and that they can be used for collective things like a shared workshop or even a shared space together. So that is maybe more of a success than in the end, because that is something that will probably last much longer than these 2 years or 3 years that we are there. And these are principles that almost always work. So, and if you ask people of other projects that live together, it is almost always what they share among each other as these basic principles of sharing, simple sharing things.
Okay, thank you. I think we heard quite a bit about the successes. So what doesn't work? And I think we can divide here into sort of what doesn't work internally, right? I think you mentioned a few things briefly, like it is hard for people to actually come together and share and learn how to do this all over again. I was thinking more on the external side, in the sense of like you face the precarity of temporary contracts, or you cannot really get perhaps new buildings. So yeah, your choice. What would you like to talk about?
First, yes, I already said that. I believe is that this temporality is not. This is out of necessity. There's no other way to get, let's say, free space to experiment unless it is temporary. We would rather see it differently, but that's how it is. And that too is why we are trying to buy a building, because that's the only way to let's say, establish these kinds of communities. For a much longer period. And there's also something else that we forgot about the basic principles, is our right to the city. You say all these misfits that live in the poortgebouwen, that live amongst other who do not fit the lists of housing corporations or whatever. They are mostly driven out of the city or driven through the edges or whatever. And to establish our right to be there, according to us, is the best way to guarantee that, is to be the owner of space. So that's what we try to do, and it's difficult, but
yeah, I think what doesn't work for us is our sense of autonomy and self-governance. And I think now I have to tell the backstory. Originally, we had a contract with the municipality that had an annex to it that said we would pay rent to the municipality, and the municipality would give us back some money for maintenance. And there's agreement, the outside of the house, also because it's a monument, is kept up by the owner, and the inside of the house is being kept up by the vereniging. However, the house was sold, and we had 2 lawsuits in 2007, for which you were actually present, and I was in an elementary school. Yeah, and because the first lawsuit was about evicting the house members, and this is the lawsuit we won, because we're still there, because the judge ruled that we would only be able to be evicted if the owner was to find a place with the same money and the same square meters, which is nowadays impossible. Our rooms are 40 square meters big, because he's gendered in this story, because he did not only count the square meters of the floor, but also of all the platforms that were built by the squatters in the 80s, in this moment of no law, which is very special, to count what squatting can do to then enhance square meters, for example, and fight against precarity. In the second lawsuit, it was about this annexation of the contract. Very boring, but nowadays we basically have a very normal housing contract where the owner is responsible for everything. If a pipe breaks, the pipe should be replaced by the owner. But instead, we still act DIY and keep up everything ourselves. And the question comes in, why would we pay if we don't have to pay? And if we want to make big renovations like our electrical systems, which is fairly outdated and actually quite hazardous, we are stuck in our autonomy, and we are held captive. Because do we want the owner to fix everything, or do we want to do it ourselves? Do we want to wake up the sleeping dog that might bite us back? And yeah, this is what does not work at the moment. And unless we will be buying the house, we will be staying in the same situation.
Can you buy the house?
If someone would sell to us, the owner is unwilling to sell. We have tried.
We have tried together with them, but really, and each time it gets sold again, and the prices go up, and in the end, it becomes really not affordable anymore to do that. But I also wanted to say what makes Poortgebouw strong is that there are not a set of individual renters, because if that would have been the case, then would have been thrown out already years and years ago. But they use and rent it as a vereniging, as a union, and that makes it almost impossible to get you out. That's why this judge said, well, you need to find a replacement building for this full union of 44 people, of this community of 44 people. You cannot find it. If it would have been 50 individuals, find a space for 50 individuals all over the city, it would have been different. So there's also strength in a community.
Of course. Let's hear from Antoine.
Yeah. Money is an issue, like, right? I mean, to put it simply, strangely enough, in our case, so housing is very well funded, and it goes with. How can I say, the way the narratives are made, it's terrible to see someone sleep in the street. I mean, I agree with this, obviously, but now it becomes more sensitive in Brussels than something else. For example, the fact that, I don't know, that students can't have a space to study, or that people eat poorly and don't have access to healthy food and so on. So right now, let's say the focus is on homes, which is great. But so that means that we receive a lot of funding to create homes, but we receive nearly nothing to actually create other types of spaces. So in our case, all the homes that we produce fund the mixed-use activity part, which is not, how do you say, it doesn't generate any profit. Or I don't know if it's the right word, because we're not for profit, but anyway, that's one thing that's difficult. And the other, I would say, the backlash of this policy making aspect of our work is that temporary use is right now institutionalized in Brussels, or gets more and more institutionalized as the year passed, and so that means that there's more regulations that are put in place that we sometimes co-write. But not always, and there's more agencies, like regional agencies, that are created, and so that means that there's more and more. The frame exists right now, when a few years ago it didn't, and so that's one big accusation that we actually suffer in Brussels from the squatting scene mostly, is that they say that they don't have access to empty spaces since us and other actors actually entered the scene. Which is something that I'm ready to hear. Yeah, I think that would be the two main challenges that we face at the moment.
That's a nice transit to my next question. So I want to play a bit of a devil's advocate here. So I've been hearing around Rotterdam that community living is losing the battle to gentrification. I mean, it's obviously a very ephemeral phenomenon, but let's keep it to that. So yeah, it's becoming harder and harder to find affordable spaces, to be able to rent something for cheaper, etc. But on the other side, I would argue that to some extent communities can be agents of gentrification for people that, are even less willing to sort of enter any sort of structures, but also just because you develop spaces, right? Like Almondestraat, you start organizing more initiatives around the city, it becomes more lively, and becomes safer, and so it becomes more attractive to developers. So my question is community living losing the battle to gentrification? Is it an agent of gentrification, or maybe these can coexist?
Yes, of course, in a way it is an agent of gentrification. Actually, all the projects we talked about here are agents of gentrification in that sense, because in a way we improve the area, or try to improve. It's even in our goals to, let's say, make a better place, etc. And in the current system, this always goes alongside with, let's say, the rise of property prices, and that, of course, is the problem. It's not the community; it's the system that somehow links the price of a property, of the value of a property, to the demand. So yeah, in that sense, we are part, and that's because there's not that much wrong with gentrification, because in a way it just means improving the neighborhood. But the result is because of rising property prices, is that people are driven out who cannot afford it anymore. That's the problem. It's not the improvement of the area. So don't blame, let's say, the communities that improve the way of life for the rising prices. For that we need to tackle the system, and that's why we say the only way to do that is to buy the property and ensure that it can never be sold again. So that's the only way to get rid of this speculative spiral we're in.
Same story here. So the little sentence that I like to say is we put rich people in poor neighborhoods, but we also put poor people in rich neighborhoods. So sometimes we don't gentrify, we de-gentrify. That's actually a program that we started with a lot of European partners to start a reflection about this gentrification process that we might be part of. Are we really? What is it? How does it work? And the story that I like to tell is the fact that, so if we simplify the process of gentrification, it's the artist that goes to a cheap neighborhood because they can't afford anything else, and it's also cool to live poorly somehow. It's okay that they do that. It's actually their only solution because they don't earn a lot of money. And then there's the bartender who opens their bar there because they have a public there. It's okay because they actually want to start a nice business, and why not? And then there's the richer people who come there because the neighborhood has become nice. I think it's only normal for them to do this. And then the last actor for me that is responsible really, and that could change something in this dynamic, is the public authority that says, okay, now there's a lot of taxpayers there, the rich people who came there. We're going to attract even more of them by improving the infrastructure. What they should do is improve the infrastructure for sure and control the price of the rent at the same time. It's difficult because usually the people who renovate these neighborhoods is a municipal actor, and the price of the rent, at least in Belgium, is rather controlled on the federal level, so in the whole country. So those two levels of power don't necessarily talk to each other. But this is something, again, that I think we can probably tackle and fight about by generating workforce and by generating proof of concept projects. And as Piet said, we said we might be responsible for this, so what can we do at our own scale to counter it? And we created this fairground cooperative that I mentioned briefly in my presentation. And I think the cooperative is now 4 years old, and it owns 15 buildings, more or less. So, I mean, it's nothing compared to the, I don't know how many thousands of buildings there is in Brussels, but it's starting somewhere. And the model is also getting, let's say, more and more familiar to the policymakers, and hopefully they will support more and more cooperatives to be born in Brussels. So.
Yeah, not that much more to add. I agree with Piet.
Okay, great, because we're short on time.
Perfect.
Last question before we move on to some questions from the audience. Let's look into the future. What would you need as people that organize such communities for the communities to continue and perhaps thrive in cities? What would you need, and from which actors, in terms of political support, housing associations?
Sorry. Yeah, you might think that I always talk about the same things, but I think support from the public authority, I think, is a very good thing, and we always go to places where we get inspired. We came to visit Stad in de Mark, that was nice, and recently we went to Geneva, where they have their culture of housing cooperatives is quite high. They own, I think, 10% of the city, but it's nothing compared to Zurich, and it's nothing compared to Vienna. So all these models are actually already existing. So two things could be identified. One is to have the state or the public authority buy land and give it to cooperatives as a long-term lease, so we can use it and don't waste the money to buy the land and build or renovate our buildings on top of the land. And then the other thing that they do much in Geneva is to receive a guarantee from the public authority towards the banks for the loans. So that means that cooperatives who don't have much financial means, get more access to loans to build their own buildings. So I would say those are two very simple solutions, and actually we're trying to organize more and more visits to those places to inspire our policymakers.
Chiara, want to go?
Yeah, ideally we would buy the house, so that's what we need. We now have a kind of a truce with the owner, so we're not fighting, but would be nice to get out of the precarity of the possibility of a fight. And to never sell the house again. That's the dream. And yeah, we always need fresh blood, fresh people coming in, new ideas. That's always welcome, but everywhere. Yeah, I think apart from that, we're quite established.
Well, I would say in general, what we all need being here is access to space, both physical space in the city, but also mental space, the space to be who we are and to live how we want to live. And for that, it's not just the municipality that, let's say, should shift a bit more to our side. It's also society in general, which is not really geared towards these kinds of alternative living. Why would we call it alternative, actually? Right? It should be the norm, basically. So that's maybe the choice, that to live collectively should be again acknowledged as, let's say, the only way in which we are able to live as a human species, with all the consequences that come with that, of course, on the scale of the planet to the scale of the family, you could say.
I think that's a beautiful conclusion. So thank you all, and I think now we have maybe 5 or 10 minutes for questions. Are there any? You can just raise your hand. No, we can also have more time for dinner. Okay, there we go.
Yeah, so I would be curious to hear your thoughts on the impact of automation, digital technologies, AI, for example, that has been rising a lot in the few last years, to maybe like deal with those higher up actors, let's say, that are very bureaucratic, maybe not really in communication. Do you have any ideas, or do you see any potentials how that could change the landscape?
When you talk about sharing and commons and commoning, there's a great example within the information technology, which is all the open source principles and the Creative Commons principles. So there's quite a lot going on there that we share, you could say, but it still is, to be honest, marginal. And apart from that, I try to ignore all these things. I try to ignore the idea that there's something called AI. what is artificial intelligence? At best, it is information gathering. It's not, let's say, the sort of intelligence I would think about. And it's certainly not social intelligence. But maybe some of my...
At the moment, I cannot see it bringing a lot of value. I think if so, it's about human relationships. And I'm not quite sure how AI would help in this moment. Maybe it develops into an unforeseen direction. But yeah, at the moment, I think it's very much about interpersonal relationships. And maybe it can fill out forms one day. That would be nice.
It actually does already. Shh, don't say. No, but I think to just put some more layers on what you said, we lose a lot of time in our projects, but also the public workers, with all these administrative tasks and budget checkings. Every year we have to give back a declaration on how we used every single euro that we received in funding. We spend a lot of time creating it. They spend a lot of time checking it. So, if we could, I don't know if you're a developer, if you could help with this, that would be great. But if you could develop such application that does that for us and for them, that actually simplifies, I think, through a blockchain type of thing where everything can be checked, and it's all transparent, we would earn a lot of time to create more interpersonal relationships through experimenting. I think those public workers, they don't have a clue of what we're doing, and we don't of what they're doing. So if we could connect more through gain of time, that would be great, yeah.
There's a non-AI solution for that, it's called trust. That's
Okay, maybe. Okay, we have time for one last question, and I saw someone there.
Hi, I'm Jeroen Dirks, urban designer. We also work a lot with community building, but I was wondering from your experience, do you select a community? So you have a certain property, or you have of course, Poortgebouw is already a cultivated community, but how do you manage then that community in the aspect of selecting people? Because I guess there's a lot of people who want to live below market value rental prices, but they have to fit in a concept. Is that also excluding certain people, or are you selecting on the people who need housing the most, who have been waiting on social housing lists, or how does that work actually?
At Comuna, we used to have two types of housing options. One was for self-managed communities, which were mostly people like me who took benefit of an empty building, and it was a bit like, I know you, you know me, hop, we get in. It was very unfair, and so we stopped that type of projects. We still have one or two that are from the past times, and now we do only homes for homeless, and then shelters, community shelters for refugees. And actually there we work with associations who work with those audiences. So we don't select anybody, we just have partnerships with those actors, social actors, and they select their audiences. But so for housing, there's only this, and we try to target where there's most needs. And then for other types of users, so people who have activities in our buildings, there we, as I said, we do those call for commons. So instead of call for applications where there's competition, we actually do around an event, collective thinking, and so on, and we try to have people decide themselves what type of, if they're going to share the space or not. Short answer, but we can talk later if you want.
With our projects, we try to have the community themselves decide who lives with them. But of course, you have to start somewhere. So mostly it starts with a seed of 4 to 5 people who already know each other, we know, and then from that people can apply. But ideally it would be a group that forms itself, finds a place for its own and builds its own place, or let's say makes its own space. But in these times, these ideals are hardly feasible anymore?
We try to keep a balance between age, who's Dutch and who's international, and between the gender. So when we make decisions of who we vote in, that's what we try to keep in mind. But we're definitely exclusive. And I think the assumption of inclusivity means everyone is welcome is anyway a bit faulty. But we cannot agree on a guideline on that, so our guideline for now is no Nazis. We cannot agree on this, how exclusive we are and what inclusivity and exclusivity means. So that's an ongoing discussions, but it is for sure that we are exclusive. And we are also not striving to be, and this might sound a little bit intense, but we're not striving to be a place where everyone can come. No, we don't want to have a real estate investor at our dinner table. We want to be a space that is for marginalized groups, and for that we need to be exclusive. Yeah.
It starts a whole new discussion this way, but that is one general aspect that you need to really is that any common space, any group is in that sense exclusive. It has a border. It has some. You are either in or out. If that is not the case, and we are all, let's say, generally the same, and there's no communities anymore. Communities are about the gathering of some groups of people, small or bigger, or networks of groups of people, and this automatically means that there's some sort of exclusion. So that's normal, but you need to be aware of it, and just by saying no Nazis, then obviously you are aware that there are people not welcome here. No Nazis, or no Nazis with us
no
either.
Police.
Only nice Nazis, yeah, no police.
Well, thank you very much, and I invite everyone to be exclusive during the dinner.